Hey guys, Mark Hagan here, and today I'm going to show you how to build a database-driven to-do list. It's going to be pretty simple. We're just going to create a checkbox list, data bind that checkbox list, and then let you add and check off items as you complete them. So the first thing you need to do is create a new web project. We're going to use an ASP.NET empty web application, and we'll call this to-do list. Clever, huh? So put that into my projects folder. Alright. So you also need to have SQL Server installed for this. Express Edition is fine. That's what we're going to be using. So this video assumes that you just did the default installation, and I went ahead and connected using my Windows credentials. So that's really the only assumption, is that you actually just did the full install whenever you installed Web Developer Express. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is just build our simple page to do the to-do list. So we'll just call it default for now. Create a new web form here. And we're only going to have one form for this, so there's only going to be one page that does this whole situation. So there's a few ways you could do this, right? You could use the designer view and drop in some controls and all that stuff, but I really kind of want to show you how to use the LINQ to SQL stuff that's built in, just to give you some more experience, and it's a more fun way of controlling or isolating your database from your source code. So the first thing we're going to do is create our checkbox list. So let's do ASP checkbox list, and we'll call this thing to do list boxes. That's fine. Run at server. Alright, so we're good there. Now there's one thing that we need to do here. We know we're going to need a few events, right? We're going to need an event for I guess on selected index changed, actually. So this just says whenever any of the text checkboxes that are inside of this list are modified, run whatever event, right? This event. So let's go ahead and create this and stub it out. Alright. And then the code behind will create this method here. Let me increase the size so we can see this. So we're going to create the stub for that event. Pretty straightforward so far, right guys? Alright. So we've created our event to handle this. So if I run this, there shouldn't be anything, but it shouldn't break either, right? Because we've created our event. Let's let this guy load up. And eventually, we'll get loaded up here. I'm doing all kinds of stuff on this machine, so it's running a little bit slow today. So you see, we just get a blank page, which is exactly what we expect, because we aren't data binding this list yet. There's nothing in it. So the first thing we need to do, now that we've created our form and we kind of have a little bit of what we need, is to set up the database. So over here, let's just create a new database. So go to SSMS, Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, which installed whenever you did the default install, I hope. If not, rerun the installer and install it. And right-click Databases, New Database. And we'll just call our database to-do. And as with all my videos, I haven't rehearsed this, so like when we run into some snags, which I'm sure we will, because we almost always do, we'll just kind of work through that. So you've created your to-do database, and that's all good in the hood. Now you need to create a table inside of that database, and this is actually going to store your to-do items. So we will call our table, I don't know, probably just to-do. We'll just leave it the same. So it needs a few fields, and I create the same couple fields every single time I create a table, and I do this because I always find it helpful to have an ID field and a date time field of date creation, right? So this first field is going to be called to do ID, and I always make that the same as my table name, and then add the word ID to the end. We don't want any nulls in this field. The type is integer, because this is just going to be like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You get the idea. As each entry gets made, it'll just increment by 1. and we're going to right-click that field and set it as the primary key. Then we're going to scroll down in this box down here at the bottom and set the identity specification property to yes. We want to say this is an identity, and it'll automatically set the identity increment to 1 and the identity seed to 1, so it just says start at 1 and then increment by 1 each time. Next thing we need to do is create our date field. Let's call it DT for date time. Type is date time. We'll make it required, but we're going to set a default value of get date. We don't have to do that actually, but I always do just in case I'm not using Entity Framework, and I don't know, this makes it easier if I'm just manually adding rows. That way I don't have to compute the date every single time. And then what else we need, right? We need a name. We'll call it let's call it to-do. Well, let's call it name. So it'll probably automatically put brackets around that varchar. And this is the link. This is actually the text that's going to go inside of the checkbox. So make this 255. And we don't want nulls in that either. So that's our table. 3 fields: to-do ID, which is auto-incrementing, the date, time, and the name. The only reason we're having this to-do ID is so that if you added 4 to-do items that are like take out trash, and then you maybe had a few more, and then take out trash again, we wouldn't know which one was being removed if we didn't have an ID after we're data bound. So we'll be able to say, instead of removing the one that's called take out trash, remove number 4 or remove number 1. You get the idea. So let's save this off. And we're going to call this to-do, which is not a really great naming convention to name your table name the same as your database, but it'll work in our situation. So we've created our table. Next thing we need to do is create a login that has access to this to-do, or we could just use Windows built-in stuff. But I find it I like to have logins. So to do that, you just go to the Security tab, go to Logins, right-click, New Login. We'll call this to-do.login, and we'll do SQL Server authentication instead of Windows authentication. And let's give it a password. All right, and I'm going to uncheck this enforced password policy because I really don't care about that. And then I'm going to go to user mapping, and we'll find our to-do list in here down at the bottom. Check that. I'm making this guy the owner, so I don't have to come back in here and do permissions all the time. I'm going to give him full-blown access because I'm not a DBA, huh? I can get around that, right? All right. Maybe not a great thing to be teaching people, but that's okay. We're just doing a quick to-do list. So we have our table created, our to-do. We've created the user called to-do.login. That's our login, I mean, not a user. And we gave that user access to this to-do table. So pretty straightforward. Pretty simple stuff so far. So now we need to connect to this guy. So what we're going to do is come back to our project, stop the project, of course, and right-click your project file here, and go down to Add, New Item, and then I believe it's called LINQ to SQL Classes. Yep, right down here. So this may be the first time you've used this LINQ to SQL, so it's kind of a fun wrapper so that you don't have to write your own data objects and you don't have to worry about that. And I'll show you that we're going to use this in the design view, and it's very, very easy. So we'll call this our to-do SQL. That's fine. And what's going to happen is it's automatically going to create this file in here for us. There we go. It's going to add the references we need, and then it created this to-do SQL.dbml. And it also created in the code behind it to-do SQL context, and I'll show you what that does here in a minute. So this is giving us some input, right? It says create data classes by dragging items from the Database Explorer or Toolbox. So let's go to our Database Explorer, and then I'm going to add a new reference here so that we can get our add a new connection, so we can get our new table that we created. So the server name. This is straight out of here. So our server name in this case is mark-pc/SQL Express, and yours will be different. It'll usually be computer name /SQL Express. If you don't know your computer name, you can do period/SQL Express. I'll show you how that works. Period just represents localhost. So here's where I told you before. You could either just use your Windows authentication and skip all that user creation stuff that I did, But we created a user, so let's do the use SQL authentication, and I believe we named it todo.login, and we gave it a password. We'll save that password, and if I check this box, I see the databases or that user has access to. We want to do. I can test that connection. Everything's good, right? Hit OK. So now over here, we can expand this newly added data connection, and I can view all the tables in there. Well, there's only one table, so I grab that to do, drop them in here, and now I have data access to this table, and I can call it through the code behind, and I'll show you how to do that. So let's do a build real quick. Not actually running the solution, although it would do the same thing. I just wanted to build the solution to make sure that we had everything we need for the code behind. So now if I come back over to my default code behind, and in this page load, now I want to do something a little bit different. I actually want to, let's just say I want to connect to that object. I could do a, what do we call it? To do SQL data context. And there's the guy I was telling you about. Actually, let's pull this out a little bit. Let's extract this into its own method. We'll call this populate list. All right, so we're creating a new method here called populate list. Private void populate list. No return type. And all this is going to do is populate our to-do list box, which is called to-do list boxes. Right. So the first thing we need to do is use this data context. So we have our to-do SQL data context. So if you would have named this DBML file Steve, it would automatically create Steve data context. All right. And this is really helpful because you could just say, we'll call it context. Actually, we'll call it DB for database, right? That's our database context. Is equal to, and then we can do new, and then new to do SQL data context. And you have some options here. You can either call it straight up, close that bad boy off, and you're good. Or if you want to pass in DSNs, let's say you had your DSN stored, which it automatically created for us in our web config. So I'll show you here. You might have one for dev, prod, staging, you get the idea. Localhost. You could modify your DSN and then pass in this connection string if you wanted to. And you would just pass that in as a string type. You could pass in an open connection you already have. There's all kinds of fun stuff you can do. We're just going to call this straight up object. All right? So, how do we do this data bind? Well, we're going to use LINQ to get all of the fields out of that table, of which there are currently 0. And then we're going to data bind that list to our to-do list boxes. I'll show you how to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to say to-do list boxes.data source is equal to db dot. And then if I hit T, I'm going to see my to-dos, and you see that it added an S to it. It pluralizes it for you. And I'm going to do dot where. Actually, I don't have to do that. So what I'm going to do is just convert it to return a list, or I could say only show me 10, and I could do like a take. I could do like a dot take, and I could type in 10. That'll give me the first 10. Or I could do a where in here and say where predicate p is equal to p, or where p is equal to the name. It's equal to hi, and that'll only pull in items named hi. I could get real fancy, but in my case, I just want to pull in a list of these to-do items, and I'm going to say to-do list boxes dot text value. Whoops, what is it called? Value data value field is equal to, and we called it to. Oops, a string. Sorry, to do ID. That's what we called it in the table. Now we're going to have to-do list boxes dot data text field is equal to name, and then we'll call data bind. All right, so that was pretty easy. We didn't really have to do a heck of a lot. There's nothing fancy in here at all going on. It's 4 lines of code to do our data bind, 5 lines of code. And We don't really need that to happen every single time, so we could wrap this up in a page dot is postback check, but we're not going to do that just yet. So that's how you do this. So let's test and make sure that it works. And the only way to do that, I'm going to run it real quick and I'll show you. You'll see that it's returned blank again, right? And that's because there's nothing in this table yet. So let's go back to our table, to do table, and we'll go in here and we'll just edit the top 200 rows. And we're going to add one that's just called complete. Here, how about this? Start video. All right, and I hit tab, refresh here. So it automatically created that date timestamp, and it created the to-do item called start video. And if I refresh this guy, we now have a checkbox here that's in our list that says start video. So when I check this, it's going to fire the event that we need to right here. It'll handle our event for this postback. Let's get back over here. So we want the ability to actually add and remove these guys, right? So we already have the stub to remove. Well, to add something, we're going to need a text box and we're going to need a button to actually add them. And while I'm in here, let's change this to auto postback equal to true. I forgot to do this originally. And this says on check, go ahead and do a page submit just to make sure that this guy executes. All right, so let's add our text box and button in. Throw a couple of line breaks in. Add our text box. And we'll call this, what do we want to call this? To-do name. And then we'll add a button next to it. Whoa. Create to do. We'll say add item. And on click, we're going to need this to do some stuff. Click is equal to create. All right. And let's go ahead and create the stub for this. All right. So now, if I run this program, this little web page, we're going to see it do our data bind from that start video that we created. And we now have a text box and a button, and they don't do anything yet, but they're wired up and they're ready to roll. So let's make this button actually do an insert. So let's get back to our project here, stop the project, and go to our code behind. So the to-do, create to-do on click has been executed, right? So what do we need it to do? Well, we're going to need this data context again, because in order to add to this table, we need to have context to that table. And then we're going to do, well, what are we going to call it? We'll call it to-do. And you'll see that this to-do singular, not the plural to-dos that we had earlier, was automatically created for us. All of our table names will automatically be created for us as we drag and drop them in there and then build the solution. So it's really cool. It works just like any other data object you might make. So we're going to do to-do, and we'll call this, I want to call it new to-do, you know, but the whole new thing really might throw you off. So we'll just call it current to-do. This is the current one that we want to add to our table, is equal to new to-do, right? And then we want to, let's see, create a new to-do, and you may not have done this before. There's two ways you could do this, right? So the way I'm going to do it is I'm just going to open a curly brace and close a curly brace, add a semicolon, and this just lets me define this object inline. So I can do stuff like dt is equal to date time dot now, and then if I just get this up, I could do name is equal to, and then, well, we have that new text box that we created, so that's going to be our name, to do name dot text. And I'll show you the other method here in a second. So that just created this object of type to do. And and it did it all in one go. The other way that you would do it is you would do to do Steve's equal to new to do, and then you would do Steve dot dt is equal to date time. You know, you get the idea. Yeah, dot now, and Steve dot name is equal to, you know, whatever we wanted to put in there. So that's the other way. I really don't have a preference which one is better. I like doing this because it does the object creation all in one swoop. I don't have to worry about it too much. So now we have to tell the database context that, hey man, I created this new to-do item, add it to your table. So the way that you do that is you do db.todos to reference the table of your to-do items. And then you're going to do insert on submit, and you're going to pass in current to do, that object we created. And then we're just going to call the db.commit changes, or what is it called? Submit changes, not commit. And that's it. It'll insert that record straight into the table. Well, then we know that we need to call this populate list, but since we're not checking here, it should automatically populate. So let's test this, make sure it does what we want, and if not, then I'll come back and fix it. So run the solution, run the project, I mean. Kill this old one. So let's just add some stuff. Add Steve. Add. Well, oh, that's weird. You know, we noticed that it didn't do our redata bind. Well, you should check on that. Let's just run this thing, and we do see that it added it. It just needs to do the data bind. So the way that we're going to do that, so stop this real quick, and we'll call this populate list method after we submitted our changes, and that'll force it to redata bind that list by calling this method below, and we should be in good shape after that. So let's try this again. Alright, and let's add an item. Add item. And as we see, it created our to-do list. So now we need to be able to check these guys off. So we've basically built a to-do list. It's just we have no ability to say, hey, I've done this. I've done this thing, right? And you see that I'm checking these, and it's calling that page method, so it's not showing it as checked. And that's what we want it to do. Because we don't want it to just hang here after I check a box. We want it to actually perform an action and delete it instantly. So how do we do that? Let's go in, and I'll show you the tricky thing that you have to do for this. This is the only tricky thing about this little project that we're doing. You have to, whenever you're looping the to-do list to find out which one was checked, you don't have a context, so you won't know that checkbox 4 was checked, for instance. You only know that a check event has taken place, a selected index event has taken place, it's changed, which means that somebody selected something other than nothing. So how do you know which one? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to create a little for loop, and you're going to loop through to-do list boxes items count. Right? So you're going to go from 0 to the list box item count, and you're going to manually check each one to say, hey, is this one checked? Is this one checked? Is this one checked? And until that, when that returns true, you're going to delete it from the list, and I'll show you how to, or from the database, and I'll show you how to do that. So you know you're going to need this data context. We've needed it every time. Why it should now be any different? But we're only going to need it whenever we find that condition to be true. So I'm not going to new one up until I need it, and I'll show you what we're doing here. So we're looping through all the items, and then we're going to say if to-do list boxes items, and then in brackets we're going to pass in the index, and the index is I, which says first one, basically the give me the current item in the list that I'm looping on. So it'll start at 0 and then 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to do dot selected. So this says if the item that I'm currently looping is selected, which means that I've checked the box, then I'm going to remove it. So let's create our, we copy and paste in our data context. And then we have to actually find this item in the table to delete it. And I'll show you how to do that. So we're going to do to-do, and we'll call this selected item is equal to db dot to-dos, our plural, dot where predicate p, whoops, is equal to, and where, so this declares our predicate p, and we're going to say p dot to-do ID is equal to to-do list boxes dot items I dot value. And the interesting thing is that this value is always treated as a string. So let's convert this to an integer, which is what we expect. Wow. All right. So we're saying where this to-do ID is equal to the item that's currently selected, and then we're going to do dot first or default. So this will either return null if it couldn't find one with that matching ID, or it's going to return the first one that it finds, and there will always be only one because we're doing a check on the primary key of the table. So how do we delete? Well, it's pretty easy. We're going to do a db dot todos dot delete on submit. Whoa, crazy. And this is exactly like the insert on submit. The only difference is we're going to pass in this selected item, right? And then db.submit changes, and then we're going to call the same thing we did before, populate list. So what I could have done is just cut this stuff out, put it inside here, and then I can skip creating an object. But I wanted it to be pretty clear for you guys, pretty easy, so that you could see, okay, he created an object, and then he's going to delete that object, because we've been using objects for the insert, so might as well make the delete the same. So if everything went correctly, we are done. We've created a working to-do list that saves and pulls from the database and allows you to delete items. So let's build and run our solution. And let's verify that our list still works. So we're going to add a hello world item to our list and add that. And I hit enter, which submitted the form, which is good. And then let's say, oh, I've already completed Steve, so I'm going to check Steve. Well, we see nothing happen, right? So we need to know what specifically is going on. All right, so let's see if it actually deleted. Click up here, hit enter, and see, it doesn't actually look like it did any deletion. Okay, well, let's see what happens when I click Steve. So I click Steve, it's calling my method, that's what I wanted, and we see that the count of our to-do list is 4, so we're going to loop from while I is less than 4, so we're going to go 0, 1, 2, and 3, and let's go ahead and set our, let's see, we want to get down here. So we want to know if an item is selected. Well, that's interesting, guys, because the item wasn't selected. What could be going on here, right? This is just an easy debug. So what we'll do first is make sure that this populate list is not being called first, because what would happen is once I hit that checkbox and it called this method, it would reset my my list. So I'm going to do if page.isPostBack, and we're going to change this to a not. So if the page is not in postback, meaning we're on the first page load, populate the list, because we're going to manually populate this thing anyway, as you guys see, right? So what's the point of doing it the second time? And let's see what this does. So let's run, and let's uncheck Steve, and what do you know? Steve disappears. So I kind of did that on purpose because I wanted you guys to see the process that you're going to mentally go through whenever you're doing this debugging. Like, don't get frustrated. Just think about the order of events that are taking place. And it's always a good idea to add the page check that make sure that the page is on its first load. So your first load's when you're going to data bind everything. After that, you don't really want it to reload unless you perform an event that tells it that it needs to reload. This populate list, right? So that's it. Let's check our database. So if I do a select top 1000, I'm going to see the 3 or 4 rows that we've got left. We have an item, a hello world item, and a start video item. Well, I've started the video, so I guess we'll get back over here and let's get rid of the start video. Let's add a end video, and I'm going to go ahead and say I've ended that. And that's that, guys. You've created your own to-do list that's database driven. I know I went through this really quick, which is probably a good thing because maybe that'll help you come up with some questions that you might want to ask. I haven't been getting a lot of questions on my YouTube channel lately, so let's really see if I can help anybody out. If you guys do have any questions, feel free to go to markhagen.me or leave them on my YouTube channel or tweet me. But I'm going to put the video here in the sample code section. There'll be a new block added down here. Actually, this is all rotating. It'll be right here in the top. And it'll allow you to dig in, and you can watch the video and ask any questions that you might have. So that is markhagan.me, markhagan.me, and you can go to my contact page, and I have my Facebook stuff and my Twitter stuff, and I have a text number, and I have all kinds of crazy stuff, ways that you can get a hold of me. And I'm pretty responsive, at least on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, the usual stuff, so, and email. But thanks for watching the video. Let me know if you have any questions, and good luck building your own to-do items.